Hello and welcome to BB Builds. I'm Alex Diaz, aka Barbie Boy, and this is the show where I talk about how I built something that has next to no real-world application. Today we're actually talking about my first and to date favorite unnecessary build, Roadie Bot. While technically not a robot, Roadie is the ultimate solution for the independent musician who can't afford a road crew. Not only does Roadie come with enough shelf space to carry both a microKORG and MPC 500, but it can also amplify anything your heart desires with a built-in Vox DA5 amp. Did inspiration strike but you don't have your phone? No problem, record it directly onto cassette. Did I mention the wheels? That's right, all of this comes on wheels. Bonus features include cassette tape holder, AM/FM radio, a battery powered option, and USB microSD auxiliary and Bluetooth input capabilities. Unlike prior builds, I did actually put some thought into this. In fact, prior to building, I've been sketching Roadie in notebooks for years. But it wasn't until 2019 when the Marie Kondo tidying up craze had swept the nation. And I found myself having to decide whether to throw out a bunch of music gear or not. And I realized at that moment, why not build Roadie? Any of this stuff, if I need to take it apart, it's fine, because if I break it, I was gonna throw it out anyway. So I got to planning based around everything I had. The microKORG synth, the MPC 500, and the Vox DA5 practice amp. So after finishing up a few sketches, it became clear the first thing to focus on in the build was the core. The main ingredient for this build? Aluminum. Yay, aluminum! Why aluminum? Firstly, because I had a ton of it left over from the scissor lift I had built. Secondly, because aluminum is a fantastic material. In a form like tubing, it's really light, but really strong. So for building something like the core here, where I'm building a pretty big piece, you could use aluminum instead of wood, or a mix of both like I did, and really take the weight down, which was really important because Roadie's always been intended to be portable. So ultimately, my idea for how I was going to build the core was to first build two 2-foot by 2-foot frames of aluminum, and then I was going to attach them at the top and bottom with two 16 by 24 inch pieces of 3/4 inch plywood. Now to actually attach the aluminum tubing together, I needed 1-inch L brackets, which I didn't actually have, but I did have a bunch of aluminum angle stock, which I could easily cut into as many L brackets as I needed. Once I had all the L brackets I could possibly want, I attached everything together, the frames and the plywood. And once everything was together, I realized I had totally messed up. I had connected the aluminum tubing in a way that there was no point of contact between any two pieces. Instead, they lived entirely on the outside of the L brackets, which made for an incredibly weak structure because it depended on just the bolts to keep it together. How I ended up fixing it was I took the outside tubing from the L frames and put them between the top and bottom pieces. But then I found another very specific problem as I was rebuilding. In order to attach the tubing together and then to the wood bases, I needed to have a bolt go from inside the aluminum tubing up into the L bracket. However, because I had pushed the two outside pieces in, my pliers would no longer fit far enough in the tubing to hold the head of the bolt for me to screw the nut on. So I needed to figure out a workaround. So what I did was I made my own tools. So I cut 3 pieces of aluminum in almost key shapes, and they were cut so that I could put them inside the tube, and together they would hold the head of the bolt while I screwed the nut on. And I'm not trying to brag, but still super impressed with myself on that one. Using those pieces in that method, I refinished all the framing and reattached everything together. So with the core build, it was time to actually find a way to install the gear inside of it, which I did using an incredibly advanced technology, shelving. So my plan for the MPC 500 and the microKORG, since they were the instruments, was that they would sit in shelves inside of the core. And those shelves would actually be able to slide out so you could play them right from Roadie. To do this, I first had to install more aluminum tubing on the sides so that there was something to actually drill the slides into. This was also really helpful in generally reinforcing the core. For the actual shelves, I pieced them together using a bunch of wooden boards I had lying around. Then using some bolts, I installed a couple pairs of shelving slides I had purchased into the new aluminum tubing in the core, and then screwed the shelves into those. And voila, I had perfectly working sliding shelves, and the microKORG and MPC fit perfectly. With the instruments in place, it was time to give Roadie some vocal cords so we could actually hear them. For this, I used that Vox DA5 practice amp. The design for it was that the amp for the Vox was in the front and the controls in the back. But to do this, it required me to open up the actual amp. I was definitely a bit nervous about this part because if I accidentally disconnected anything or ripped a wire out, there was a really good chance I wouldn't know how to put it back. I proceeded with extreme caution, and as I opened up the amp, I made sure to take a lot of photos. That way, if something went wrong, I would maybe be able to backtrack and fix it. Once I had it opened, I was happy to find that it was relatively compartmentalized, and for my purposes, the only thing I would need to do was add some length between the amp and the control panel. Once I had snipped it, before I could reconnect the amp and the control panel, I had to create housings for both of them in the core. For the control panel, I built a small frame out of aluminum tubing in the back bottom left of the core. The amp needed a bit more work though. For this, I took the original cabinet that the amp had sat in and used it as a stencil to stencil out a new hole on a new piece of wood so that the amp would fit perfectly in it. Then I added another piece of aluminum tubing between the framing and the front that was just high enough so I could install the wood piece between the bar and the bottom of the frame. Then I just screwed the amp to the back of that new wood piece. There was also a battery cabinet that was part of the amp. I just screwed it into the bottom of the core. Then I just had to reconnect the amp back to the control panel, which I did by just taking some wire I had and soldering the wires back together. And thankfully, it worked. With the core built, instruments installed, and amp in place, I decided the next thing I wanted to do was give Roadie some legs. So the legs. Super simple. All I did was take the legs off an extra work stool I had and put it on Roadie, which was made even simpler by the fact that I used the 3/4 inch plywood as the bottom of the core, so it was really easy to screw some new holes and bolt it in. The only thing I had to make sure to do was cover all the electronic parts so that none of the wood shavings or dust would get into it. Super simple. Let's talk about Roadie's head. So I'd always intended to use a boombox. I originally intended to use one of the bigger ones, one of those like bigger classic 80s boomboxes, but honestly they were like a little bit too expensive. So I went to Best Buy, and lo and behold, the first thing I see when I walk in there is an entire display of these ion boomboxes, which is kind of kismet, given that who buys a boombox anymore besides me for this. So I originally wanted Roadie's head to be blue, so I thought, this is easy. I'll take the boombox, I'll open it up, I'll be able to take all the components out, I can then spray paint the plastic casing, and they'll look great. I opened it up, immediately broken. I had snapped off the tuning indicator. Upon further inspecting the inside of the boombox, I realized I had zero business being there. Removed the broken piece, closed it up, decided silver is great. Silver's a great color. So with no paint job necessary, the only thing I need to do is attach it to the core. So here's how I did it. And I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but it's what I did. I used 4 pieces of wood to create a neck for Roadie that I screwed into the top center of the body. Then going through the battery compartment of the boombox, I drilled 2 holes in the bottom so I could attach 2 L pieces of aluminum that would create an insert piece that fit exactly into the neck. From there, I secured everything together by drilling through the side of the neck, through the aluminum pieces, to the back, and inserted 2 bolts to attach everything together. With that, Roadie had a head and was looking pretty good, but a little exposed, so I figured it was time to skin it up. To skin Roadie up, the first thing I did was just measure all the parts that I knew needed to be covered. I decided on 1/8 inch plywood because I had a bunch of it lying around. In a perfect world, I would have used maybe some kind of plastic shell like sheets of PVC, but I also knew that with enough coats of a high gloss paint, it would still give me this plastic effect. I decided to continue using nuts and bolts to attach it because I knew that I would eventually have to paint it, so it gave me the flexibility of removing it. The trickiest part was drilling holes in the right places so that bolts that were sticking out of the frame could fit through the shell and it would sit flush with the frame. So, I did plan out Roadie a lot more than I have other projects. However, when it came to the arms, I didn't do those. So I drew out some plans for a simple version of the arms. The only function I was dead set on having was that the arms would be able to lock at 90 degrees or higher so they could hold up a guitar or bass by the neck. And I did design that and I did build that and it works. However, these legs can't actually support that much weight when you put a guitar or bass into Roadie's hands. So it works and it doesn't work. Anyway, to start building the arm, I did everything in wood because it's a little bit faster to work with. The way I built the arm is the upper arm piece is sandwiched between 2 Lazy Susan turntables, which are themselves sandwiched between 2 circular pieces of wood that I am referring to as the elbow joints. The forearm piece of the arm is then directly attached to those elbow joints so the entire forearm can pivot around the upper arm. To attach the hand to the forearm, I split the forearm into 2 separate pieces and installed the hand between them and connected everything together with a bolt that the hand can pivot around. Once I had this working as the wooden prototyping, I just switched the forearm and upper arm out with 2 pieces of aluminum each, both for strength and aesthetic purposes. To attach the arm to the rest of Roadie, I first had to create a simple wooden shoulder mount. I then installed a few more pieces of aluminum tubing in the core so that I could install the shoulder to it and then attach the arms to the shoulders. Pro tip, keep your batteries charged for your power drills because you don't want to get it stuck like I did. With that, I had an arm completed, and the only thing I needed to do was duplicate the process to create the other arm. Then once I had both arms attached, I cut out a few more pieces of 1/8 inch plywood to cover the area around the shoulder and some of the shoulder mount too. The only thing left to do in the arm was to actually give it the function of being able to hold the guitar. What I did was I took the arm and I lifted it up above 90 degrees. Then I just drilled a hole through the elbow, through the first aluminum tubing of the upper arm, back into the back circular piece of wood. If I wanted Roadie's arm to stop, all I have to do is stick a bolt between these elbow joints and the upper arm, and it'll hold steady. So you could put a guitar in Roadie's hands, but you shouldn't, because the whole thing will tip over. With that, Roadie was completely functional. All that was left to do was some finishing touches and paint. So before I started painting, I wanted to add this cassette tape holder to Roadie. To do this, I sketched out what I wanted the cassette holder to look like on Roadie's front panel, then took off the panel and sawed it out using my Blade Runner table saw. Then using some scrap plywood, I built a box that would actually hold the cassettes and glued it to the back of the panel behind the hole. Then I glued 2 extra pieces of wood on the top and bottom of that box to secure it. To paint, I started the arduous task of disassembling all of Roadie's panels and everything that needed to be painted. Fun fact, Roadie's blue is Krylon's Patriot Blue. In between the coats of paint, I used a couple pieces of scrap wood to create these kind of dividers within the cassette tape holder, so the cassette cases would slide in nicely. In between coats, I also sanded. I really wanted to ensure that I was going to get the shiny coat that I was looking for. Once painting was finally complete, I started the arduous process of once again reassembling. I think it took like 3 hours. The very last step I took was to apply this aluminum band to the front, and that's it. That's how I built Roadie. Thank you so much for watching. If you have a sec, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It definitely helps us out a lot. And until next time.
Until next time, this is Roadie signing off.